like you.
I'm here for you. So when you say enough is enough, I can't take any more of this bull.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Analytical Innovations Podcast. I am Dr. William Monroe. Excited to be here today. I've got a really fascinating guest. His name is Rick Couch. He's a retired colonel from the U.S. Air Force. And Rick, please just stop me if I say something erroneous or say something wrong, and just hop in there and correct me. But you kind of started out your career coming from Texas A&M, getting your mechanical engineering degree, and then aeronautical engineering and systems management in the graduate degrees. And then you went on to become a test pilot for the U.S. Air Force. You were an instructor as a test pilot with the Air Force. And you supported all sorts of things and activities and programs that I'm sure you still can't tell us about because they were classified. But one of the things that is documented is that you were at one point you commanded the B-2 Combined Test Force, and that during that time you actually flew the inaugural test flight for the B-2 stealth bomber. Which is really cool. I think that's just one of the coolest looking planes that's out there. I remember having a toy B-2 when I was when I was much smaller than I am today. And then after that, you went on to have kind of an additional career in, after you retired from the Air Force, an additional career in the commercial side of things. With Lockheed Martin in a variety of roles, supporting test activities and deployments. And then in 2012, you retired from there. But my goodness, over your career, you've flown almost 6,000 hours in over 60 different aircraft models and series. And now you're still active, serving on boards and as an officer in the Civil Air Patrol and different things like that. So thank you so much for agreeing to spend some time with me today to have a conversation and share your experience and wisdom and thoughts with me.
Okay, well, I'm glad to be here, and hopefully I have some wisdom left. I'm getting to be old.
You don't feel like you've given all your wisdom away, do you?
No, I don't think so. Not yet.
Well, all right, all right. Well, talk to me a little bit about your background. What kind of drew you to the Air Force in the first place?
Uh, I I don't know. I always wanted to fly, but I think the real crux of what had me interested in flying and possibly becoming a test pilot was the astronaut program. You know,
Okay.
I am of the age that when I was in high school, that's when the Mercury program was going on, and then Gemini, and then Apollo. And when I was in pilot training with the U.S. Air Force, was the night in July when they landed on the moon. And the
Wow.
whole time I'm thinking, at some point in time in my life, I hope that I have the opportunity to become a test pilot and to get involved in that. And so as my career advanced, uh, when I had the first opportunity to apply to go to the Air Force Test Pilot School, I did that. And while I was in grad school, I got selected to go to test pilot school. So that was a real goal. And at some point in time, I would have loved to have been in a part of the space program. And
Sure.
I have a number of friends that actually were shuttle astronauts. They were in my test pilot school class when I was at Edwards. I actually interviewed with NASA at one point in time. I wasn't one of the people selected, but
Hmm.
four people out of my test pilot school were selected, and all four of them ended up flying on the space shuttle. So that was good. But, if you can't fly in the space shuttle, if you can't be involved in the space program, how about the B-2 program? I was fortunate enough I was in Washington, was working in an office there, and the guy that was a program manager for that program, who was highly classified at that point in time,
Yeah, of course.
I was involved in it from a staff officer standpoint and was working some issues related to that program and some others. And one day a guy walks up to my desk, and another colonel, and says, "Hey, what's your next assignment?" I said, "Well, they're not talking to me about an assignment yet." He said, "Well, how about going to Edwards to be the B-2 Combined Task Force Director?" Then took about 2 seconds to answer that question.
I believe
And
it.
yeah, so I was fortunate enough to get back to Edwards, and I was part of the program for 5 years out there. And when I first got out there, we had about 40 people in the program. When I left, we had about 1,200 working the flight test activities for the program. So I managed all that, and it was the penultimate of a career. I have done nothing like it since then, and I was, I think very lucky that I landed in that spot. So I loved every second of it.
Yeah, I mean that's just the wild, and so many questions come to mind, both just from organizational leadership things and just also on the B-2. For the moment, I was going to stick with the B-2 questions and then loop back around to some of the leadership stuff. Um, with the with standing that up and then doing that test flight. Um, what did that feel like going into like that first test flight of the B-2?
Yeah, I've been asked this question many
I'm
times.
sure you have. I'm sure you have.
And my answer is always that we had worked so long and so hard. We'd spent many hours in the simulator. We had practiced that first flight in a variety of different airplanes, and when that thing actually is happening, you're so busy and so focused on trying to do what you're supposed to be out there doing, you really don't even think about the fact this
Sure.
is a brand new airplane. It's a very complex airplane. I mean, all it would take is one little shit, and then your world would come apart on you. But you're just very focused on doing the job that you had to do, and so you don't think about the fact you're in a $2 billion piece of equipment. And I've always said, if I was in the Cessna 150 or if I'm in a B-2 as a pilot, the one thing I worry about, I don't want to crash. And crashing in either one of them can be fatal. In the B-2 on that first flight, we were really focused uh, on flying the airplane and gathering as much information as we could about the
Sure.
airplane. And one of the keys when we got out of the airplane, one of the first things that all the engineers were asking was, did it fly like the simulator? And the answer was absolutely, which was a very key thing for that first flight, was
Yeah.
knowing that all of the simulation that we had done and all of the engineering work that prepared us for that flight was validated in that one flight. And
Yeah.
yeah, and usually a first flight of an airplane is usually you know you it's a kind of a point solution. You go to a certain point, you gather information, that sort of stuff, and after that first flight, now you start growing from there. You start
Hmm.
opening up the flight envelope for the airplane. And
Sure.
but that first test point is extremely important. And if we'd gotten out and said, "Hey, the airplane flies nothing like the simulator," it would have been a big problem.
Yeah, so and correct me if I'm wrong, the reason that it's important that the simulator and the airplane fly the same isn't just for training, but it also is a validation, kind of a qualitative validation that the quantitative aspects of the simulation, the physics, modeling, and everything is accurate enough to represent the way that the airplane actually flies. Is that right?
That's correct. That's absolutely what you're trying to do.
Okay. Well, wow. I mean, that makes sense. It wasn't, going to be my first thought of a question, but yeah, as an engineer, that makes sense that that's the first question that they would have all wanted to ask. Have you had any initial test flights of a plane where it did not go like the simulator?
Uh, no, but I can think well, like the F-16. First flight in the F-16 was not meant to be a first flight. First
Okay.
flight of the first flight of the first F-16, which I guess was the YF-16, so it was still a prototype airplane.
Okay.
The guy doing the high speed taxi test on the airplane was asked to get some information about the lateral stability of the airplane. So it's the airplane rocks back and forth because in the simulation they knew it was very sensitive laterally. And so the idea on the high-speed taxi test, which is not, you're not supposed to get off the ground, was after you lifted the nose gear, was to wrap the stick so they could get some engineering data about how sensitive it was laterally. And the one thing the pilot forgot to do was pull the throttle to idle. When he started wrapping the stick, the one wing touched the ground, then the other side, and he realized he was airborne. And
Oh,
so
wow.
came around the traffic pattern and landed. That was the first flight of the F-16, and it was unofficial. But they got the data, the engineers got the information they needed
Yeah.
because of the sensitivity this had in the lateral mode. So that's an example of how if you're not real careful, things can come apart. And I know when we did high speed taxi on the B-2, we had so many restrictions on things that that um, that the safety people put on us, that even though the engineers are trying to get as much information as they can as you're doing that taxi test, the last thing they wanted was for the airplane to get airborne while we were doing it.
Yeah.
And oh, we had a bunch of restrictions on us, and it didn't happen. We got the nose wheel off the ground and then back on the ground, stopped, and the engineers got what they needed to once again validate that everything they had up until the point in time the airplane was off the ground, that the engineering was good. Uh, so it's a big step.
Yeah, so it sounds like as much as possible when you're doing these test flights, you really are trying to make it a true experiment where you're holding as many of the variables constant as possible and just testing out the one thing or the couple of things that you cannot test without doing that maneuver.
Right, right.
That's interesting.
And you think about in the development of an airplane, you got wind tunnel tests, you got all
Hmm.
sorts of things that you do that the engineers now meld together to become the airplane. And in the case of the B-2, it's a fly-by-wire airplane. So it's got four channels for the flight controls in the airplane, and those have got to work every time for you to be able to fly the airplane.
Yep.
And they all need information related to the aerodynamics of the airplane, and also for all the control surfaces on the airplane is how effective they are and how powerful they are in terms of as you move the stick in the airplane around. So that whole process I mean, when you think about it, is really very interesting. And
Yeah.
uh, well, it's just I mean, being part of that as an engineer, both as a mechanical engineer and an aero engineer. I mean, it's fascinating work. That's why, being involved in a program like B-2 is so exciting.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. So kind of backpedaling a little bit, I still want to learn more about how it was like to grow that team from that 48 to 1200 folks. What were the biggest hurdles or the biggest lessons you feel like you learned growing the team that large? Because analytical AI, where I'm working, we're a small business, and going from 3 people to 15 people, we hit lots of bumps and valleys over that. So I can only imagine going from 48 to 1200 is its own animal.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's a huge challenge, but one thing to understand from the Air Force standpoint, everybody that was involved with the program was handpicked.
Okay.
And a lot of that was related to the classification of what we were doing.
Hmm.
Until they pulled the first airplane out of the hangar, which was about a year before first flight, everything was classified about the program. Everything, every piece of paper we ever touched was classified. Well,
Sure.
as we're growing this team, we have to be very select in the people that were picked to be part of the team. So whether it was the pilots or it was the engineers or our maintenance people, et cetera. Now, to make it even a little more complicated, I mean, you would think in the real world, just kind of growing an organization, as as long as you're keeping control of everything, it would work out. But the issue that we had in terms of going from the 40 people who we originally started with were all Air Force people. But as we got bigger and bigger, we now started integrating Northrop Grumman,
Sure.
General Electric for the engines, Boeing for pieces of the airplane, Hughes for the radar, um, LTV. So we had people from all of those different organizations involved, and we had Air Force Systems Command, Strategic Air Command, Air Force Education Training Command, and AFOTEC, the Air Force, AFOTEC, I can't remember what it stands for, but we had all of those different organizations that had to be integrated together within the combined task force.
Okay.
So the challenge was not just getting people and saying, you're a maintenance guy, so you get in the maintenance side of this. You're an engineer, you're over on this side. You're a technical guy, you're over here. We had to integrate people from all of the contractors and the Air Force people and all
Yeah.
the different organizations together. So it was quite the challenge. Um, but when you're the head knocker and you're the guy that can um, pretty much direct how all this is, we're going to put this together, it makes it a little bit easier. And I guess I always felt like we were in control. I mean, I worked very closely with the Northrop Grumman, the senior person for Northrop Grumman. I worked very closely with the senior people for each of the Air Force organizations. So we just worked together and kind of put this team together to test the airplane.
Yeah. What were there any instances where people with that varied set of teams that were all working together, were there instances where there was a disconnect where everybody's not speaking the same language and then everybody had to come back together and get on the same page?
Yeah, but that's we had weekly staff meetings and we
Okay.
kind of sorted through things where if if somebody or one of the senior people felt I was going off in a direction where we really didn't need to be going, we could always talk about it and start, making a kind of a change in direction. I can think of no time where we things got so disjointed and we were at each other's throats,
Sure.
that that the whole thing was going to come disconnected. And every one of these different organizations, whether they were contractor organizations or their Air Force organizations, they all work for another boss in their organization.
Yeah.
And if they ever felt that I was doing something that that they were diametrically opposed to, they always knew they could come talk to me and we could sort our way through it. And of course I worked for a two-star general in the Air Force at the Air Force Flight Test Center, but I also worked for the guy that was the program manager. He was a one-star at Wright Pat, who was the program manager for the B-2. And they, believe me, they didn't hesitate if they felt that something was going on that they were uncomfortable with. And as a matter of fact, most of those guys, most of the senior people were so supportive of things. I mean, we did some things that were very unique on B2 that when we first suggested them, we would get people saying, "Are you crazy?" And I give you an example of this.
Yeah, please.
One of the problems that the B1 program had was when the first B1s were delivered to Dyess Air Force Base. All right, they depended very heavily on the contractor, which at that point in time was Rockwell Collins, for maintaining the airplanes.
Sure.
So if the wing commander said, "I want a sortie, I want a B1 to fly," he depended on the contractor for maintenance, for all the spares and all that sort of stuff for the airplane. And the Air Force was slowly getting up to speed on how to do the logistic support of the B1. Well, one of my maintenance guys, one of the senior maintenance guys, one day we were drinking coffee. This is when we were the group of 40. He said, "Hey, look at all the problems the B1 is having at Dyess. There's a way to prevent that from happening on B2." And he came up with and suggested that what we do is the same time we're doing flight test, we do what we called logistics test. We
Mm.
develop all of the maintenance manuals. We develop all the training classes. We develop
Oh,
all the
yeah.
support equipment and all that sort of stuff. And the thought was, if you generate a sortie for flight test, why don't we do this with all the right stuff, the
Yeah.
right manuals, support equipment, the right technicians, etc. Well, we approached uh, first the Air Force. We went to the system program office at Wright Pat and said, "We got this idea. What do you think?" And the one star, his name was General Schofield. And by the way, General Schofield is a dear friend, but he, at first, he and his team said, "Oh, we don't know. That's not the way we do this." And said, "Yeah, but look, the Air Force has got to be able to fly this airplane when it gets delivered. Why don't we try this?"
Yeah.
And we finally convinced him, "All right, it's worth trying." He said, "I'll go with you to Northrop. Let's put this idea on the table with them." And we went to them. I think a fellow named Smith was the program manager at that point in time from Northrop. And his first thought was, "You're out of your minds. That's not the way we do this."
Yeah.
And we said, "But it's the way we could do this, and
Yeah.
it would help with delivery of the airplane." And we finally convinced Northrop. And we had different elements within Northrop that kind of, they pushed back on this,
Sure.
but it was successful. On the fourth flight of the airplane, fourth flight, we had the people that generated that sortie in the airplane were all Air Force people. It was using Air Force tech data, and it was using support equipment that was going to be delivered with the airplane. And it was amazing. And
Yeah.
it would never have happened if we'd done it the old way.
Yeah.
So it's possible, in programs like B-2 to take ideas forward, and if the ideas make any sense at all, is once you convince people, yeah, that does make sense, is now being able to integrate that. And we did it. We actually pulled that off. And I was at Whiteman Air Force Base when the first B-2, this was 1997, was delivered there. And the team that was there to support that airplane were all Air Force. And there
Yeah.
was never any question about, you know, generating sorties in the airplane, because all that logistics support stuff had been done as we did the flight test stuff in the airplane. It was really a very exciting thing.
Yeah. No, I mean that's it it's wild how those things that when you're in it and you're working on it, uh, it is so disruptive to do it a different way than you had, but now that you did it that way, it just makes sense. Um, and so that's really cool. It's a good example, and it also sounds like your leadership style and the culture that you tried to foster was very transparent. It sounds like also you were very open and willing to receive feedback as well as provide feedback. So it sounds like that was all really part and parcel of the whole
Yeah.
growth.
And I had to believe that a lot of that training, there's things that the Air Force instills in people,
Sure.
is, being open like that. And I mean, the days of Curtis LeMay are probably long gone, but uh, I mean, that was a different way of being in command and control and that sort of stuff. So it's no more of this my way or the highway kind of
Hmm.
approach. And I really enjoyed every second of it. I mean, I have to say that. So
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. I can tell from the stories and everything. It's really cool. Um, so now kind of looking forward as technology has continued to evolve. I wonder what sort of lessons or thoughts you have on, I mean, there's things like all the AI revolution of things going on with all of the new LLM tools, and augmented reality, virtual reality, you name it, new technology that's out there. Um, what lessons do you feel like you learned throughout your journey as a test pilot and through the B-2 program and then everything else that you've done? Um, do you think applies to just broader technical innovation and developing new technologies in general?
yeah. Well, in the new AI world, I think there's all sorts of possibilities of how things can be developed, like airplanes. I think that the use of the tool sets now are going to make the development of airplanes, I would think, much easier to do. Uh, and you know, in the world that I came out of, which was, I'm a Vietnam era guy. I flew over there for a year. The technologies that we were using, when you compare them to what's available even now, it's kind of night and day different.
Hmm.
And I think, the technologies is the expansion of technologies as we get smarter about the use of AI, will help in the development and help with, the development go faster. I mean, the president yesterday, when he was announcing these new ships and stuff was talking about contractors being faster and being quicker and more agile and all this sort of stuff. Well, that's great, except when you look at the system that the DoD uses for buying stuff, it's very cumbersome in trying to get things done. But maybe with AI and the tools will make it go faster. I would think so. Uh, I mean, he talks about, some things have taken forever and they shouldn't. Well, what happens, I think, in a lot of cases, and the B-2s would be a really good example of this. What was initially envisioned in the first RFP for that airplane and what ultimately got delivered to the U.S. Air Force changed dramatically because
Hmm.
of technology.
Yeah.
As technology changed, then you have to, well, oh, here, well, let's put out an engineering change proposal because this has changed and we want to incorporate it in the airplane. Well, guess what? I've been developing the airplane to one set of technology. Now you give me a new one, and you want me to do that as some sort of engineering change proposal. Well, I can do it, but it's going to cost a lot of money. It's going to
Yeah.
take time to integrate it in. And I can give you an example of that. When we were working on B-2, uh, back in, this is probably in the 80, well, and it was the initial design of the airplane up until about 85 or 86. The navigation system that was going to be used for the airplane was the same one that was in the SR-71. And
Okay.
it basically was something that looked at the stars, okay, and used that for navigation. And that's the way the SR-71 did it. It was the same basic system. Well, guess what? GPS came along,
Yep.
and GPS changed the world. And
Hmm.
and when we were originally doing flight tests, we were using a C-135 with the navigation subsystem for the B-2 in it. We had this stargazer as part of the airplane. And to go out and collect data on its accuracy and that sort of stuff, you had to fly in using radars for position of the airplane, so you could compare what the stargazer was saying is where you are versus what the radars were saying you were, and the difference between the two was the errors in the system, and so you
Yep.
could correct for that. Here comes GPS. Guess what?
Yeah.
Stargazer, you don't need that anymore, and you
Yep.
don't need these radars on the range. Use GPS. And we
Yeah.
started doing that in 86, 87. That's when we started doing it. GPS changed the world. What
Yeah.
else is going to change the world? Well, think about what's going on now in the Ukraine with drones.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. You talk about a game changer for war, there it is. And the integration of those little flying things and their capabilities, what an AI problem that is.
Yep.
Think about the use of AI and all of this information that we've gathered for years about things like that, and now applying that to a new way to fight a war using drones.
Yeah.
I mean, it's,
Wow. Yeah.
yeah, oh yeah, what a world.
Yeah. So one of the things that keeps on kind of piquing my interest as we're going through this is it sounds like part of what happened, during the development of the B-2 and then also with some of these other systems is it sounds like there's a lot of modularity built in to how you were doing things so that while yes, it's overall designed to work together, certain pieces, if the technology was updated, you could take that out and put something else in that would serve the same purpose but be more effective without disrupting the rest of the design. Is that fair to say? Is that part of the plan?
Yeah, well, it's an interesting, I mean, I think you're right. to some degree. But in the case of the B-2, the original design was probably built around a 286 computer. All
Okay,
right.
yeah,
Yeah. Now think of where we are today. And I know they changed that the B-2 had 17 different computer systems in the airplane, and they were all
sure.
integrated together. There was an architecture that dealt with all the pieces as they hung on this architecture, and so the different computers and stuff. Well, they replaced them
Yep,
a number of years ago and to more modern computers. And they got to a point where they only needed one computer in the whole airplane to replace the 17.
yeah,
But you don't want to do that. All
yeah,
right.
because then you're relying on that one computer.
Yeah, all it takes is one bullet and one computer and you've lost everything. So
Yeah,
you spread everything out. So the systems, so the radar subsystem and the navigation subsystem and the flight control system and all that stuff sits in different places in the airplane, but it's all federated together. And if let's say you say I want to put a new air conditioner in the airplane, so the ECS, environment control system, I'm going to put a more efficient air conditioner in the airplane. So I'm going to pull out that one. I'm going to put in a new one. But it's got to integrate with all the rest of this because everything in the airplane depends on cooling. Because
yep,
if you don't cool the computers, you got a real problem.
yep, you do.
And so the integration of that, you would say, oh, it's easy. Pull one out, put one in, hook it in. It's not that easy. It's got
Mhm.
it's got to it's got to be integrated in, but as it deals with all these other pieces of the airplane, and maybe air conditioner would be simple, but you take the radar out and you put a new radar in it. There's nothing simple about that. In trying to connect it to all the other pieces so that it works properly to do its job. So when you make that change, guess what? The flight test guys love that because we got to go do more flight tests, you know?
Yeah,
That, so it's technology's great, but for a B-52 trying to integrate technology to an airplane that was built and first flown in 1952, I mean, it'll still be flying in 2052, I imagine. Uh, so it's some unique problems in trying to
yeah,
make that happen.
yeah. That's wild. That's wild. Um, well, hey, thank you so much for talking to me today. This has been a fascinating conversation. I've really enjoyed it. When when you think back on your career, is there anything that if you could go back in time and tell yourself when you were there in grad school before you got picked up for the test pilot program, is there anything that you would go back and tell yourself if you could?
Well, and tell myself in what sense?
Well,
I mean,
just any advice for make your life easier, or I don't know,
I don't know. I've
just
had a
advice.
wonderful life. Trust me. I've
That's always good to hear.
yeah, and that you know, I've partied hardy, I've played hard, worked hard, and I've been married to the same woman for 51 years, and
Congratulations, that's fantastic.
yeah, well, she's put up with all this, and I don't understand why. Uh,
Oh, well, I guess that leads to a different set of questions then. How because you've got kids as well, right?
right.
How did how did they like having a test pilot for a dad? Are they any of them in the Air Force?
No, our son was in the Army Guard for
Okay,
he was in Gulf War One, active duty, and then was in the Guard for a number of years. The kids, dependents, military dependents, they put up with dad being gone a lot and moving around a lot and that sort of stuff. And I know one of our daughters one time complained that, oh, we just move all the time. And yeah, that's right. But She's one of these people you can put her in a room full of people and wait 30 minutes and she'll know everybody in that room.
Oh,
And
wow.
it's something that she's learned by adapting, over time, moving from place to place and, not being in the same school for 2 years in a row and that sort of stuff. So just, it's just the way it is.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's fair enough. I grew up homeschooled, and my mom sometimes apologizes for how chaotic things were because we were doing school on the kitchen floor or wherever we were doing it, and in a post-COVID world, it's like that's just life these
Yeah.
days.
Yeah. That's right.
So it is wild how sometimes things that you may not realize become your superpower because of the situations you've been put in can sometimes become that superpower.